Karen Miles and Officer Daniels never expected their lives to collide in the fluorescent aisles of Maple Market, but in a matter of minutes, a simple grocery run turned into a viral nightmare that left a small town reeling and a nation asking what could drive a seemingly ordinary woman to sink her teeth into a police officer. It was a calm Saturday afternoon at Maple Market, the kind of day when locals shuffled in and out with their reusable bags and quiet routines. The store sat on the corner of Willow Street, surrounded by oak trees that had begun shedding their orange leaves. Nothing unusual ever happened there until Karen Miles walked through the glass doors. Karen looked like anyone else at first glance, but there was tension in the way she moved. Her lips were pressed tight, her hands gripping a half-open box of cereal. She headed straight for the customer service desk, ignoring the friendly greetings from the cashier at checkout. A few people noticed the sharp click of her heels against the tile floor and the look in her eyes, cold and determined, as if she had come prepared for battle. The young cashier behind the counter smiled nervously as Karen placed the box down and began explaining her complaint. She said the cereal tasted strange, that it wasn't what it promised to be. Her tone was clipped, precise, and growing sharper by the second. The cashier apologized and explained that the store couldn't process a refund for open food items. That was when everything began to unravel. Witnesses later said the air seemed to change. Karen's voice rose from irritation to fury in an instant. She accused the store of scamming customers, of selling poison, and of treating her like a fool. Her words were laced with a strange sense of performance, as if she were speaking to an invisible audience. A few shoppers nearby slowed their carts, curious but uneasy. The cashier tried again to calm her, but Karen slammed her palm against the counter, making a sharp sound that echoed through the aisles. Someone called for the manager. He approached carefully, keeping his voice even, but Karen had already lost her composure. She began pacing in front of the counter, muttering about conspiracies and hidden ingredients. Then, without warning, she swept her arm across the counter, sending receipts, pens, and a small vase of flowers crashing to the floor. The store fell silent except for the sound of her heavy breathing. A mother with 2 children quickly moved toward the exit. An older man pretended to study a shelf of canned soup while watching from the corner of his eye. The manager stepped back and quietly called the police. Karen, realizing what was happening, turned her anger toward the rest of the store. She shouted that everyone was against her, that they were part of it, though no one knew what it was supposed to be. She moved to the frozen food aisle, muttering and pulling open freezer doors as if searching for something. Employees kept their distance, worried she might throw something or hurt herself. The automatic doors at the entrance opened, and police officers entered, their radios crackling softly. Karen saw them instantly, her face twisted into a sneer. In that moment, the quiet Maple Market where nothing dramatic ever happened became the center of a story that no one would forget. The woman everyone knew only as a difficult customer was about to become infamous, and the calm town of Pinebrook was about to be shaken by a scene that would soon be replayed millions of times across the internet. The 2 officers stepped inside Maple Market, exchanging a quick glance as they took in the scene. The store was strangely quiet except for the hum of the freezers and the muffled sound of a woman shouting somewhere down aisle 6. Shoppers stood frozen, unsure whether to stay or leave. One of the officers, a tall man with a calm presence, gestured for the crowd to keep back. The other moved forward slowly, eyes on Karen Miles, who stood surrounded by scattered boxes and half-melted frozen dinners. Karen's energy filled the space like a storm ready to break. Her hair was slightly disheveled, her cheeks flushed, and her eyes sharp with defiance. She pointed at the officers and demanded to know why they were there, insisting that she was the victim, not the problem. When they tried to speak, she talked louder, cutting over them, pacing like a caged animal. Every word came faster, sharper, louder, until it felt like the sound itself could shatter glass. People began lifting their phones, recording what they were seeing. The flashing red light of a camera caught Karen's attention. She turned toward the onlookers, raising her arms as if declaring herself a fighter in a one-woman protest. Her words tumbled out in fragments about freedom, lies, and betrayal. None of it made much sense, but her passion was undeniable. It was a spectacle that no one could look away from. The officers tried to de-escalate the situation, keeping their tone low and steady. They asked her to step outside, to take a breath, but Karen wasn't listening. She laughed a sharp, almost hysterical laugh and started pacing in circles. She mocked them, repeating their words back in exaggerated tones, twisting their calmness into what she called authority games. Her voice bounced off the tile and echoed through the store. When one of the officers took a cautious step forward, Karen froze. Her face changed, the taunting smile turning into something darker. She clenched her fists and muttered under her breath. The officer reached for her arm gently, intending only to guide her toward the exit, but that single touch lit a fuse. In a blur of motion, Karen lunged forward and bit down hard on his forearm.
The officer shouted in pain and pulled back, trying to free himself. The other officer quickly moved in, tackling her to the ground as she kicked and screamed. The customers gasped, some dropping their phones, others still filming. The sound of her cries mixed with the scuffle on the floor. One officer managed to handcuff her as she continued yelling that she was being attacked, her voice breaking with fury and fear. When they finally got her up, her hair was tangled, her breathing ragged, and her eyes wild. She laughed again, a strange, hollow sound that made everyone around her uneasy. The officers led her outside, their faces tense, while a crowd followed behind. The moment she was pushed into the back of the police car, someone uploaded the video to social media. Within an hour, it had spread across multiple platforms, captioned with bold letters that screamed, "Crazy Karen bites cop at supermarket." By nightfall, the clip had been shared thousands of times. The small town of Pinebrook had become an unwilling stage, and Karen Miles had become a name everyone suddenly knew. When the video of Karen Miles biting an officer spread across the internet, people couldn't stop watching. It became one of those viral clips that seemed too unbelievable to be real. The comments poured in from all over the country. Some viewers mocked her, others tried to justify her behavior, and a few wondered what could drive someone to such a public breakdown. News reporters began calling it the Maple Market incident, and soon journalists started digging into Karen's past. What they found turned a viral moment into a deeper, darker story. Karen had once been a respected real estate agent in Pinebrook. She was known for her energy, her charm, and her ability to sell almost any property she touched. Years earlier, she'd been featured in a local magazine as one of the town's top 10 rising agents. But behind the confident smile, her life had started to crumble. Her marriage ended abruptly after rumors of betrayal. A few months later, her business partner accused her of financial mismanagement, which led to an investigation that drained her savings and reputation. Friends said she became withdrawn after that. She sold her large suburban home and moved into a small, aging house on the outskirts of town. Neighbors noticed odd behavior. She rarely left the house except late at night, and when she did, she avoided conversation. Delivery drivers said she refused to accept packages directly, insisting they be left on the porch. Some claimed they could hear her talking loudly to herself through the walls, as if arguing with unseen people. Over time, she filed multiple complaints with the local police department, claiming that people were following her. She believed her neighbors were spying through their windows, that her phone was tapped, and that drones hovered over her property at night. When officers checked, they found no evidence of any of it. They described her as polite, but clearly distressed. One report even noted that she had installed a dozen small cameras around her house, all facing inward instead of toward the street. Her mental state continued to deteriorate. She was seen at the pharmacy more often, sometimes standing at the counter for long periods, staring at her prescription bottles as though trying to decode a message. A pharmacist once said she returned a bottle of pills because she didn't trust the color. It became clear to those around her that something was wrong, but no one knew how serious it had become until that afternoon at Maple Market. Investigators looking into her background found that Karen had recently been ordering unapproved supplements and medications from online sources overseas. Some of these were advertised as treatments for anxiety and stress, but contained untested ingredients. It was impossible to tell which ones she had actually taken. What stood out was a pattern of desperation, an ongoing search for control in a life that had spiraled far beyond her grasp. To the world watching her viral video, Karen Miles was just another internet spectacle. But to those who had known her before, she was a woman who had slowly unraveled, one disappointment at a time. The meltdown at the grocery store was not a random outburst. It was the final, visible crack in years of silent collapse that no one had noticed until it was too late. Inside the interrogation room, the bright fluorescent lights buzzed quietly as Karen sat handcuffed to the metal table. Her face looked pale and drained, but her eyes remained restless, darting around the room as if she were searching for something that no one else could see. The officers who brought her in stood just outside the door, whispering to each other, trying to make sense of what had happened inside the supermarket. To them, it wasn't just an arrest. It was chaos captured on camera, and the woman at the center of it all seemed far from ordinary. When the questioning began, Karen's behavior shifted between calm and confusion. She insisted that she hadn't attacked anyone, and claimed that the officer had provoked her by touching her without permission. Then her story changed. She said the officer's uniform had moved on its own, that it had wrapped around her arm and tried to pull her in. The detectives exchanged glances, unsure whether she was joking, exaggerating, or truly convinced of what she was saying. Her words were slow at first, then tumbled out rapidly, full of strange, disjointed images. A psychologist was called in to evaluate her. During the session, Karen refused to look directly at him. She talked about hearing faint voices when she was alone and seeing shadows that followed her, even in daylight. She said she couldn't sleep because the noise inside her head never stopped. Her tone wasn't angry anymore. It was frightened. She seemed trapped inside her own thoughts, unable to separate what was real from what wasn't.
The report that followed suggested a severe mental breakdown, possibly triggered by stress, trauma, or medication. Tests revealed traces of several substances in her system, including one that immediately raised concern. It was an experimental anti-anxiety drug not approved for medical use in the country. Investigators learned that Karen had bought it online from a foreign seller advertising fast mental clarity and calm focus. The drug contained compounds known to cause vivid hallucinations and delusional thinking when taken in large doses. The discovery explained some of her erratic behavior but also deepened the mystery. It wasn't clear how long she had been taking the pills or if she had mixed them with other medications. Neighbors later recalled seeing empty bottles scattered in her trash bin weeks before the arrest, labels printed in a language they couldn't read. It became likely that the meltdown at Maple Market had been building for days, her mind caught between reality and distortion until something small finally pushed her over the edge. As news of the investigation spread, public opinion began to shift. What had first looked like an outburst from an entitled customer now seemed more like a mental health crisis gone terribly wrong. Some people expressed sympathy, while others insisted she still needed to face consequences. For the police, it was a case that blurred the line between criminal behavior and psychological collapse. Karen spent several weeks under psychiatric observation while authorities continued their inquiries. During that time, she barely spoke, except to ask strange, quiet questions about whether the walls were listening. When she finally did speak about the incident again, she said she didn't remember biting anyone. She only remembered feeling trapped, surrounded by people who were trying to take her voice. What had started as a viral scandal was quickly becoming a troubling portrait of a woman lost in her own unraveling mind. Karen Miles's trial drew more attention than anyone in Pinebrook could remember. The courtroom was packed each day with locals, reporters, and curious onlookers who had watched her breakdown online. The viral video had become evidence, played again and again as prosecutors described her actions and defense attorneys painted a different picture, a woman overcome by a mental illness she couldn't control. The footage filled the room with uncomfortable silence each time it played, the sound of her scream echoing off the walls. For some, it was hard to believe this was the same woman who once sold homes with a bright smile and practiced charm. The prosecution argued that no amount of stress or confusion could justify attacking a police officer. They described the bite as deliberate and dangerous, proof that she was fully aware of what she was doing. The defense countered with medical reports and psychiatric evaluations showing that her mind had been unraveling long before that day. They emphasized the unregulated medication, the isolation, and the documented signs of paranoia that no one had addressed. The judge listened quietly through every testimony. Officers described the chaos at Maple Market, the screaming, the struggle, and the moment she lunged forward. Experts explained the possible effects of the foreign drug in her system. Neighbors spoke about her strange late-night behavior and the way she'd begun fearing everyone around her. Each piece added to the picture of a woman who had become a stranger to herself. In the end, the verdict reflected both sides of the story. Karen was found guilty of assault but declared mentally unfit to serve prison time. Instead, she was sent to a psychiatric facility for treatment. When she was led out of the courtroom, she looked distant and expressionless, as though the weight of everything had finally emptied her. The crowd outside called her name, some shouting insults, others standing silently, unsure what to think. Months passed, and the noise surrounding her case began to fade. The online world moved on to news stories, and Pinebrook slowly returned to its quiet rhythm. Still, traces of the incident lingered. Some residents said they couldn't walk into Maple Market without thinking of that day. The bite mark on Officer Daniels healed, but he admitted in interviews that the memory hadn't. He described her eyes at that moment not angry, but lost. After a year of treatment, Karen was quietly released. Her whereabouts became uncertain. A few people claimed to see her walking along the lake early in the morning, wearing oversized sunglasses and a scarf pulled up around her face. Others believed she had left town completely. One rumor said she was living with a relative under another name. No one could confirm any of it. Then one evening, a small envelope arrived at the Pinebrook police station. There was no return address, no stamp beyond the town's postmark. Inside was a single piece of paper, folded neatly, containing a brief handwritten message. It wasn't me that day. It was the noise in my head. The handwriting matched hers. The letter was filed away with the rest of the case documents, another detail in a story that had already blurred the line between guilt and tragedy. To most people, the Maple Market incident became a cautionary tale about mental health, stress, and the dangers of chasing quick fixes for deeper pain. But for those who had seen it unfold in person, it was something more haunting. It was a reminder of how quickly an ordinary life can fall apart, how one moment of chaos can define a person forever, and how a quiet town can carry the echo of a scream long after the cameras stop recording.